You're listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast, the podcast for communications professionals in the corporate world who are committed to advancing their work and our field's reputation as critical business advisors that are not only invited to the decision-making table, but are required there. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh.
Today, in the Path to CCO Plus series, we're speaking with Bianca Olson, who is the Chief Communications Officer at HMH, formerly known as Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, a learning company focused on the K-12 education market, where she reports to the CEO. As we talk today, Bianca and I are going to dig in a little more into a couple of specific areas. We're going to talk more in this episode about how she thinks about the communications function, what skills are required to get there and stay there, learning and growth in this field, complete with all of its trials and rewards. We all know of those. And a bit more about the future of the field that we're in, this crazy, wild, rewarding, and challenging field that we're in. So welcome to all of our listeners today. Welcome back to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. And welcome, Bianca. To start, Bianca, can you tell us a little bit about your career path to get where you are? Was it linear or winding? This answer is so varied, so I'm curious about your own path.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tara, for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here and happy to talk a little bit about my career path. So it's a good question. And I think for me, it's a little of both. And so linear in that I've always been in communications. I started in public relations on the agency side and I guess never looked back. But a little winding in that I've gone kind of into different industries and across different kinds of communications and different size organizations. And so I started at a small agency at a time when sort of the dot-com boom, and I had a huge variety of clients, everything from ad-supported internet brands, which was really interesting, of course. Not many of those are still standing today, but it was a great kind of crash course in communications for startups. And then also had big clients like, enterprise software companies. My clients ranged really in size from, the smaller dot-com kind of startups at the time to larger enterprise software companies. And so it was great to have that varied experience across size of client and different kinds of communications. And from there, I went to a larger agency where I worked on a large brand, Hewlett Packard. And so I really enjoyed that and that kind of relevancy to society and kind of getting that experience with a larger company. And from there, went to a mid-sized agency where I stayed for a little while and had a broad range of clients in the financial services world, as well as professional services and some other interesting areas. And so on the agency side, I definitely have learned, my communication skills, largely focused on external communications. And then after that came over to the corporate side. And so in-house communications, where I've really grown in my career and focused on kind of building a function and, stretching across all different areas of communication from internal communications to external to corporate social responsibility and beyond.
Our paths are pretty similar. I too started in .com PR, moved to a larger agency, then moved to a mid-sized agency, and then moved corporate. So I'm like, hey, twin, that's interesting. So now that you're at this senior level, I'm sure you have some interesting views on the skills required to get there, both in building and expanding comms expertise and like all of the different areas that you've talked about, because agency side, you really specialize in like PR, right? Sometimes marcom, sometimes social media, which was just emerging at the time that I think you and I were back there in the day, agency side. But really you're focusing on a particular expertise. And then when you move inside an organization and to get to the place where you are now at that senior level, you're growing in both expertise of what quote unquote comms is, internal, external, influencers, all of those things. And you're also required to really think about how you work differently. And this is an interesting thing that I have a perspective on, because I think back in the day when I was agency side, I remember looking at my clients and thinking like, it's like, why are they making this so complicated? It's so easy. Like, just take our direction. Just do the thing that we all agree, including them, that we should be doing. And when I went inside a corporate organization, it was so different. It was like, oh, this isn't about what I know about comms. It's about everything else around me. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts about both what you need to grow when you move into corporate from the comm skills perspective and what you consider comms, and then also the other skills and areas of expertise that you need to grow outside of like the strictly comms expertise.
Yeah, so I think, from a kind of communication skill perspective, I think the most critical pieces are really certainly the kind of simple and obvious things like written and, spoken communications, being able to get your point
Mhm.
across well, being an excellent writer and being able to convey, perspectives and storytelling in writing, I think is also incredibly important, obviously. I also think, at a kind of higher level, it's the strategic thinking and storytelling around what makes complex topics simple and easy to understand, what makes stories interesting, how to look at what's happening in the world and in the news and be able to relate, what's happening at your client or your company and translate it into something that will kind of fit into that overall narrative, that's out there. And so I think those are the things from a communications perspective that we really need to know and get excellent at to be good at our jobs. I think too, it's about beyond those communication skills, which are so critical. I think there are also some things that just make in-house communicators as well as agency communicators really good at their jobs and able to continue to kind of advance in their careers. And some of the biggest things are relationship building, which seems obvious, but I think sometimes we can be moving so fast to do our jobs well, we forget that building relationships, really good, strong relationships and partnerships across our organizations is absolutely critical. And by doing that, I think you build the trust in your partners so that they will come to you when they have thoughts. They will start to see you as the strategic advisor and partner that you are, as opposed to just kind of, telling you or asking you to do something that they consider to be the right communication next step. And instead coming to you and your team and asking for your view about what the right next step is, or sharing their goals and asking you, what you think the kind of plan should be for communications channels and a communication strategy, which is, of course, always our goal to really be that strategic partner. And I think it does really start with building those relationships and trust across the organization.
I entirely agree. And people talk about building relationships, but they don't really, I think that's a big challenge for people in our field because we don't want to be order takers, but we
Mhm.
also, so it's sort of like it's different. You can be likable or be like build relationships. Cause I just was having this conversation with somebody yesterday that's in the comms field that was saying one of the early pieces of advice that they got in their career was to be likable, which made me cringe frankly, because I feel like women in particular here, oh, be likable. And I mean, if we think back to sixth grade, it was all about being likable. You had to almost like hide how good you were at certain things so that people would like you. And so I think it's less about doing the thing that people want you to do. And it's more about getting them to see the value that you offer, but also doing so in a way that shows them how it benefits them and showing them a bit about who you are because people want to
Yeah.
work with people that they like.
Well, that's what I was going to say about being likable. Like, I think both can
Yeah.
be true. I think it is important to be likable, not in the way that,
Not in the way I'm
you're
describing, or like a sixth grade girl is
where you
being
have to
told.
hide your skills, but in a way that both can be true. You can show how amazing you are at what you do and how much value you bring. And that makes you likable because you're helpful and you're a strategic partner. And it doesn't mean you have to do everything people want you to do, but you can help them achieve the goals they want to achieve
Yeah,
and help them respect your view and your opinion. And that I think makes you likable. So, to your point, we all want to work with people we like. We spend so much time at work. It's not fun to work with people you don't like,
right.
honestly. And so
Don't be
it's
a
like,
jerk.
yeah, so I think it is really important, but less in a way that you're trying to change yourself to be liked. Instead, be yourself and be a partner. And I
Yes.
think that's how you both become likable, but also really valuable and
Yes.
build great relationships.
I think that's an important key, especially for those who are at that like manager director level, who are
Mhm.
often told to like, now you have to start doing things differently in order to lead.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and the relationships become all that more critical because you're not getting direction from somebody at a higher level. You're sort of like expected to own things and push back in the appropriate ways and, build those relationships. And
Yeah.
so, one thing I'd love for any of you who are at that senior manager, directorish level to hear is that you don't need to change who you are in order to lead. Just show them who you are and what you're trying to accomplish in partnership with them, not for them and not against them, but in partnership with them. And I know you're nodding your head here. People, our listeners can't hear, but you're nodding your
Great.
head and smiling, and you entirely
Great.
agree with me. And I know that about you. So consider this a team up point of view from Tara and Bianca. You don't need to change who you are, just provide value, be a partner. Now, when it comes to comms expertise, you came agency side, you were focused on external, all of the things that you have now led, corporate social responsibility, internal comms, all these other things. What did you learn or how did you learn the components of those areas in order to lead those functions?
It's a good question. I think it's partly just knowing the organization that you're a part of. And
Hmm.
again, about kind of building relationships, understanding what the goals and the needs are, and then being thoughtful about how to create programs and solutions that will serve those needs. I think it's
Hmm.
also relying on others who have the expertise. And so, building an internal comms function based on what you believe to be the right thing. But also for me, it's been, building a team of really smart experts in their spaces and learning from them. And so not necessarily feeling like you have to know everything or just kind of, gain expertise out of thin air, but learning from others. And, also finding ways to educate yourself, participating in events or reading things or, kind of understanding case studies and how other companies have done it. But for me, it's really been just having an amazing team that I, rely on as a partner and who really not only has the experience in their space, whether it's internal comms or corporate social responsibility, but has the capacity to focus on it and really be thoughtful about what it
Yeah,
means within our organization.
I'm going to give a hard validate to that because I love everything you just said. Everything, because I think communicators are often told figure it out. Like you have limited resources, you have to like learn the things on the fly. You take on the opportunities that are provided to you to do more and more and more. And at some point you'll be rewarded for that. But that leads us to think that we always have to know it all and figure it
Mhm.
all out and know every single thing about anything that we are leading. Because in some cases, we're leaders who are working with leaders who, or reporting to leaders who have no clue what we do. And so we feel like, well, we don't want to be that person. We want to know everything, right?
Yeah.
And I really think we need to take ourselves out of that. It's great to be curious. I mean, that's really, you have to be curious in this field. And it's great to want to learn. Again, we have to want that in this field. But to feel like you need to know it all in order to lead it all is off base. And I compare this to like a CFO. A CFO may have never run payroll. They don't need to know how to run payroll. They need to hire somebody who knows how to run payroll. They may not have ever been a financial analyst. They need to know somebody who is a really strong financial analyst. They may have never done investor relations. They need to hire somebody who really knows that well. They need to know enough to be dangerous so that they can manage those people, but they don't need to know every component of every piece. And so I think that's an important thing for communicators to listen and to hear, because if you trust in your team and you hire the right people and you keep them on board and you empower them
Mhm.
to lead themselves,
Yeah.
then you can have a strong function. And you learn from them as they learn from you. Just because you're the leader doesn't mean that you don't get to learn from people that are reporting to you. That's like a silly thought in my point of view. You don't need to know it all in order to
Totally.
do it all, right? How would you encourage people to advance the skills that you talked about, relationship building and, you know, hiring the right people even?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, relationship building, I think, I was thinking about this when you were talking about being a strategic partner across the business. But I think one important way to build relationships internally, particularly, in an in-house role, is just really getting to know the business and what your peers and other leaders within the company do and really understand it. And so I think sometimes we as communicators think of ourselves as just focus on the communications aspects and, maybe a little bit surface level, like we don't need to know it all. And, we don't, as we just said, but I do think having a really good understanding of the business and of what your business leaders do is critical. And that's what will help, just like they should understand what you do. And I think education on what communications does and what communicators do is important as well. But understanding each other, I think, is what leads to good relationships. And so I would
Yeah.
just say, as you said, be curious. It doesn't mean you have to know absolutely everything, but get educated on what the organization does. How does sales work? How do different parts of the organization work? Maybe it means continuing education in a certain space like finance or something along those lines. But I think just knowing that makes you so much better able to support and partner with people across the business and build those relationships. And so that's where I would start, just being interested in and kind of getting to know the people that you work with, both, professionally and personally. That's obviously another important way to build
Mm,
relationships to your point about being liked. Not only do we want to be liked, we want to like the people that we work with. And so just getting to know more about their lives certainly, is a good way to build relationships to see that they're more than just their role. And then hiring, I think just really fully understanding what you're looking for in a candidate. And when you meet someone that seems like the right fit or multiple people, exposing them as much as possible to others on your team so that it's not just you making a decision, but that you're really ensuring that, whoever it is that you're looking to bring on board, that the rest of your team has the opportunity to kind of meet them and understand them, and just giving them exposure to others within the organization to make sure it feels like the right fit to them as well. Because I think the hard skills are important. It's, important for someone to have sometimes done some of the things that you're looking for them to do and know the space, but it's also really important that they, are a good team player and able to collaborate and kind of, fit in to the team structure that you have and are able to work with everyone that you need them to and have that kind of strategic advisor mindset and or at least are able to grow into it. So I think that's what I would say. And just trying to look kind of far and wide, when looking to build teams, I think is a good
yeah.
approach.
The relationships piece that you shared, I'm really glad that you talked about the focus on learning the business. And there's always more about the business you can learn. I remember spending 7 years at a health insurer in-house. And I felt like I knew at that point, I was like, I know how this place works. I know everything about everything. Like I have become, I guess I didn't necessarily consider myself an expert on all things health insurance, but I was like, what else is there to learn? What else, could I know? And the fun thing is like there's always something new to learn,
Yeah.
no matter where you are in what business. And I think
Mhm.
everyone in business at any business can take the same approach. In comms, it's more critical because we're that global view. We need to think of all audiences. And if we don't understand what the priorities are for our partners, then we can't understand their audience, right?
Mhm.
So, yes. What's one thing that you would say to people? One thing I hear is people get a little nervous about asking questions
Mhm.
because they're like, am I going to be perceived as like dumb that I
Yeah.
don't know the answer here? What would you say to people that are worried about maybe asking the simplistic things about the
Well,
business?
it's a good question. I had this conversation recently with some team members where, you have a question, you're sitting in a room, you don't ask the question because, you're second guessing yourself or you think it's a dumb question, as you said. And then the next thing you know, someone else has asked the question and everyone thinks it's an amazing question. And then you're like, I should have asked the question. I think sometimes it comes with just time and experience and confidence to realize that there really are no dumb questions. I mean, certainly you don't want to look like you have no idea what's going on, but honestly, I find most of the time when you have a question, someone else has the question too. And so,
Yes.
sometimes it's a balance of like, let's wait and see if my question is answered because you don't want to be talking just to be, you know, hear your own voice or kind of say things just to be heard. You want to be asking things that make sense. But I have found normally that, when you wait, sometimes a question gets answered. And if it doesn't, ask it because I think people appreciate the curiosity, they appreciate the need for clarification, and certainly would rather that someone have a good understanding of the business or whatever it is that, the team is working on than walk away not knowing and try to put together the pieces.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that we often are most critical of ourselves. And
Mhm.
also in comms, I think logic is a major superpower of ours, logic and
Yeah,
global thinking. And that's not necessarily a superpower of everyone, and that's okay. Other people are
yeah,
great at other things. And so an obvious question might come to you, and you might think, is everyone like, have they addressed this? Because is this too simple of a question to
yeah,
ask? And I always tell people, ask it. It's not too simple because you're asking, sometimes it's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to say out loud. But guess
yeah,
what? As I spoke with Stephanie Roberts in a recent podcast episode, she was like, you kind of have to be willing to say the thing, even when it's scary,
totally.
you know?
Yeah.
And I entirely agree with her. And sometimes it's a question that literally nobody is thinking of. And
That's the thing. It's like you think it's obvious, but it's not
right, it's
oftentimes.
not always obvious. Just because it's obvious to us doesn't mean it's obvious to everyone.
Yeah.
And vice versa. There's some things that I'm sure other people think like, how did you not see this? It's like, well,
Mhm.
I didn't, right? So just
Yeah.
give yourself grace and know that you can ask the question. I
Yeah.
entirely agree with you and love that you shared that. I mean, this is the Communications Business Advisor podcast, right? So we can't be business advisors if we don't know the business.
Something you just said reminded me as well. I was at the Page Society conference recently, and a big piece of the conversation there was about this idea of chief communications officers and communications leaders as chief sense makers, and that a
Huh.
big part of our job is making things make sense. And so I think you can't make things make sense if you don't ask those questions that really help to kind of break it down and simplify, the business or complex topics. And so I think even asking those basic questions can sometimes just be a tool to really help make things make sense for your audiences. So that can be another good way to think about it. I really liked that concept.
Yeah. Speaking of that, on that topic, I'm speaking with peers at your level in all kinds of different industries. And one thing that's consistent across all of these conversations is about being a critical business advisor rather than what I've termed a communications waitress, there to take your order. Tell us a little bit about how this shows up for you and teams that you've worked with.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's sort of like the perennial challenge for communicators that, you know, I think sometimes communications can seem easy or obvious. And it's one of those fields that sometimes people think anyone can do. And so as a
Hmm.
result, there can be times when the communications team is seen more as an order taker than a strategic partner. Certainly, that's not the goal. And I think that that's kind of the key objective, for all communications leaders to really be seen as and position your team as the strategic partners that you are and should be. And I think that when that's working well, everything is just so much more effective. You can make sure and everyone sees that things do make sense. The cadence of communications, the messaging aligns. It's just kind of firing on all cylinders when a communications function is really able to be that strategic partner because I think just in general, the way the company is viewed is, more cohesive and more thoughtful, and you kind of support the whole organization in a more effective way. And it just results in better storytelling that all makes sense together.
And it also helps with getting the right resources in place. Uh,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that's funny because you and I have had this conversation before, or touched on it before, and I see many who know our work say that they would never want to do our job. And I know you've said that before. Like people have said to
Mhm.
you, like, oh my God, I would never want to do your job. It seems so hard. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is the one we just talked about, there's people who don't know what we do and think that anyone can do it, right? It's like
Exactly.
two variables that we need to find the right balance. And um, what do you think we can do to bring more understanding to what it is that we do? Or is that even needed?
Yeah, I think it is needed. And I mean, I think when we talk about relationship building and what good relationships look like, I think that it is both us understanding the business, but also peers and others across the business understanding communications. I think it's on us to really educate. And I think we can do that both by just truly having a kind of elevator pitch, if you will, about what your team does and how you want to be partnering with the business. And just really every time you speak to someone, explain that so that they hear it over and over again. I also think it's showing them what that means. And so working with them to create really thoughtful strategic plans and executing them well with great results. It's like that's what really then shows people across the business that you are a great partner. And then next time they have something and they want to partner, they'll come to you and ask for that partnership rather than just, order a press release, quote unquote.
Yeah. No more ordering.
No more ordering. I think it's a little of both. I think it's both, educating and showing. I think
Yeah.
both things are.
One thing that can cause confusion for our own industry, within our industry, and also a bit of unease for executives, including comms executives like ourselves, is understanding the like quote unquote right structure for communications and what the leadership role should encompass. Like, does it include marketing or components of marketing like social media? Does it include public or government affairs? Does it include corporate citizenship, events? There are so many different descriptions of what a comms leadership role encompasses and what a comms leader should cover. I wrote about this recently in a LinkedIn newsletter. What are your thoughts on this? I'm curious.
It's a tough one because I think it's so highly dependent on the organization, how the organization is structured, the industry, whether it's a B2B or B2C industry, whether the organization has a business unit structure with go-to-market functions incorporated or not. Sometimes in that case, you might have a centralized marketing organization that is together with communications. Also highly dependent on whether the industry is, regulated or not. And so I think that it's a good thing to have a perspective on as a communicator when you're within an organization to just really think thoughtfully about what makes sense and be able to kind of make recommendations. But it's hard to say, what the best model is because I think it does depend on the company, the industry, and even sometimes the talent and the person in the role and, what their strengths are compared to others within the organization.
I 100% agree on this. This is actually one of the reasons why companies bring me in because communications leaders want another perspective on how they should structure their teams and how they should advocate for it. And usually during a time of change, like a new strategic plan is created for the company or a new, they've bought another company or something like that has changed. And
Mhm.
so they need to change their structure. And I'm always asked usually by a CEO or someone at that level, because I work in partnership with the CCO, and that person is usually asked as well, what's the ideal, structure based on size of organization or financial results or employee size or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, there is no answer to this. And so there is no template I can provide to you, and I can give them this answer. And the beauty of that, though, it can be uncomfortable, but the beauty of that is that this is an evolving field.
Yeah.
So it's not like, well, it's finance. And so finance includes these things, right?
Mhm.
Comms is still evolving. And so it doesn't include all things in a templatized format that it could. It's more a little bit like HR. Maybe HR is a little further ahead. But for example, in some organizations, internal comms is within HR. In some organizations, it's centralized into the comms field. Marketing is the same way. Marketing's constantly evolving. And so I think we just have to accept the fact that this field is part art, part science. And there's some science components to it and some art. And the art is about making the right structure fit for your particular organization, where it is today and where it's going.
I agree. I think also, I was just going to say one constant that I think is helpful is to view and kind of respect the communications function as that strategic partner across the business. I
Mhm.
think there can be some situations where it's very far down in the organization and doesn't necessarily have the connection at senior levels, to either the CEO or the C-suite. And that I think can be challenging. And so I think the details of the structure can shift, but just that kind of recognition that communications is a really important strategic function for the business and needs to have representation at a pretty senior level, I think is one helpful place to start.
Oh yeah. I'm holding up my hands in a like praise be on that, because when comms is buried, it won't work. And I've
Yeah.
spoken about this and talked about it multiple times. And that's one thing that I would love for C-suite leaders to understand. It doesn't necessarily always need to be that the comms leader is reporting to the CEO. It could be the chief strategy officer. It could be, some other function, but it needs to have a tight connection to that C-suite. Let's talk a little bit about future of our field with the changing business environment, technologies, political environment, everything's changing. What do you see as the top challenges and opportunities for our field and for the people in it?
Yeah, I think in some cases, the challenges and opportunities are the same thing. And so the things that are challenges also present real opportunities for our field. I'd say one of the biggest challenges that I have come across, and I think it's ongoing and will continue to evolve, is the polarization of the country and the world in some ways, but particularly in the US. The very different views that are held on different sides of the political spectrum, I do think present real challenges for communicators where in another world, you might have been able to take a position that feels neutral. These days, it feels like nothing is neutral. And
Mhm.
so I think that's hard. And I think it just requires an even more thoughtful view on how we react to certain things, how and when we put our voices out there, et cetera. And so it's not insurmountable, but I definitely think it's something that has become more challenging and just requires us to, again, really, increase our strategic view. And I actually think it's something that has necessitated an even more strategic role for communications. And so, in that way, I think it can be an opportunity too. Other opportunities, I think, are just, to your point about the pace of change. The earned media landscape is changing so much. Newsrooms look very different. The way we think about earned media has changed. The way we think about owned channels has changed. I think all of that presents real opportunity. AI and the way SEO now, the way generative AI engines pick up information on organizations is again necessitating us to really take a look at our mix of media. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. And again, I think the real constant is just the need for strategic communications partnership across an organization. And I think some of that change, again, is what has led to a kind of increase in the strategic importance of communications and this idea of
Mm,
communicators as kind of chief sense makers.
yeah, and hopefully we stay there. I think there have been
Mhm.
times where we've seen our field elevate and then maybe take a step back, and then elevate and then take a step back. I'm okay with that as long as it's consistently evolving and we're taking two steps forward and one step back. But I think you're right that, and this is a massive opportunity for us to solidify this role. And as you said, the chief sense officer. This one is a two-part question. I've often shared that measurement is critical in comms and even shared some ideas on how to go about it so you can advocate for what's needed to support the organization in a comms role, whether it's, staff, external resources, technology, some other thing. So how do you go about tackling measurement? And do you think that it helps with resourcing and budgeting? And And then the second part of this question is one of the biggest challenges is measuring what never gets shared, right?
Mhm.
These are the things that are never communicated because we are that strategic advisor. We are at that table to advise. In other words, like the power of our counsel to prevent a crisis or to accomplish a goal wouldn't have happened if we weren't there, or maybe wouldn't have happened. How do you suggest colleagues go about measuring the power of our counsel?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a hard question because, to your point, sometimes the best result is no result, is no story.
Right.
And so, we think about it in a few ways. I mean, sometimes it's just really painting a picture of the situation and just explaining all the things that we had to do to ensure that there was no, negative coverage or that we were not included somewhere that we didn't want to be included. The other way we've looked at it, and this isn't always possible, but we've had a few situations that have really resulted in pretty high volumes of negative media attention. And so the way we've measured our impact on that is over time, really analyzing the mix of positive, neutral, and negative coverage related
Mm.
to a certain brand or a certain topic, and then just kind of tracking the continued decrease in negative and the continued increase in positive and neutral. And sometimes that can really help show a pretty dramatic impact of the actions of your team. And so that's one way that we've thought about it generally.
Yeah.
And measurement overall, we think about, we just have really tried to evolve the way we think about it. And certainly, volume is important and one way to look at things, but we really tried to think about, quality over quantity and how are we hitting the right messages with the right audiences and just really show what that looks like and focus on that as opposed to just, these kind of bigger metrics that we've always thought about or talked about, like impressions or
Yeah.
circulation.
Volume. Yeah. What about the resourcing and budgeting piece? Do you find that measurement has helped you with gaining a better understanding of what resourcing you need and how to effectively budget for the function?
Yeah, I think it has. I also think it really helps with internal stakeholders to show them the rationale for a strategy that we're recommending. And so, for instance, if an internal partner wants to send an email or, put into place a tactic that they believe is the right one, having metrics and measurement on our own channels, and this is for internal communications, and how well read they are, or, how much engagement they get internally, can really help us show, here's why we believe the best path forward is to use these pre-existing channels. And so I think it's both being able to show the value of your team and why you might need more resources or why going in a certain direction is a good idea, but also internally to show why the strategy that you're recommending is going to be an effective one as opposed
Mhm.
to, something else that someone might feel they want to do.
That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate your thoughts on this. I know we're coming up on time here. I know we could continue talking all day about all this stuff and
Yes.
help the listeners out here. I hope that you enjoyed your time with us. Is there any other last piece of advice that you'd like to share with folks that are in this field that are growing either at your level or maybe, and I think most of my listeners are at around that director level, VP level? What would you share with them?
Yeah, well, it's been great to be here. I really appreciate all your thoughtful questions. I guess piece of advice that I would share is that I believe communications is an incredibly impactful and rewarding career and field. And I've definitely had times in my career and along the way when I have doubted
Same.
why I continue to do it, especially at more junior levels when there was just a lot of stress and tears and other things. But I
Mhm.
guess I would just say stick with it and find the right fit for you. Communications can look so different depending on where you are on the agency side, on the corporate side, in different industries. And, if there is part of it that you like and enjoy, I would just say stick with it because I do think that it's an incredibly rewarding role. And as we've talked about, it's really becoming more and more important. And so I just think that it's a great path, whether you want to stay in communications or expand beyond communications. It's a great place to be. And I
I
love it.
agree. Yes, please don't leave our field, you talented communications business advisors out there. Thank you so much for your time, Bianca. And I hope that you all enjoyed this episode of the Communications Business Advisor. We will be back in another couple of weeks with some more messaging. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Level Up email. You can find it in the show notes. It's taramcdonagh.com/level up. And you'll get a couple of extra tidbits of insights that we want to share after we finish this recording for all of you. Thanks so much. See you next time. Keep advising.
If you're interested in working with me to advance your work and your team's reputation as critical business advisors, never order takers, check out taramcdonagh.com. Thanks for listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or a review. It helps people find us, and we can't ignite a movement without sharing the message. See you next time, where we'll continue to do the work to elevate our field's reputation and elevate the careers of the people in it. I created Raise the Tide to help elevate our field and the women in it. It's part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. It encompasses all of these things because it takes all of these things to rise in your career. I asked a few Raise the Tide crew members to share what their experiences have been like in the program, and here's what they had to say. What's one thing that's been surprising to you about Raise the Tide?
I honestly was surprised by how quickly I felt part of something really unique and special.
Something that surprised me about being in Raise the Tide is just how much I feel seen. My crew holds up a mirror for me and even helps me see myself in ways that I haven't before. It's extremely validating, and it's a pretty powerful experience.
I was really nervous at first about how would I gel with everybody else in the group, and would we really get to know each other, and would we really become close? It's amazing how suddenly they become your biggest group of cheerleaders and your biggest advocates and the ones pushing for you and rooting for you. And that was really surprising to me.
If you're interested in this program, head on over to taramcdonagh.com and complete the Raise the Tide form. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide, raising the ships for our entire industry.